Draft physics video. Yay. Sort of. Maybe. Kind of. Anyway. Comments. So the last video was the Michelson-Morley, and not one single comment on the subject of that video, which is the realization that beam splitters don't create two equal beams. They create a diffracted beam, and that diffraction creates two very different beams of light when they're recombined for the second interaction with a beam combiner at that point. And that the path lengths are even different when you think about what divergence, the implications of divergence is that the external paths, the divergent paths, are longer, which means the light is coned. And so the one that's diverged more, because it's gone more distance, diverging, the path length is different, which means there would be a phase difference. So, but no comment on that. Alright, so this video will end up being mostly two slit stuff, so I'll probably categorize it somewhere in there, because that's where the comments tend to be. One of them is from the older video, so I'll read that, from a Diarmundi guy. Just, to answer his point. You mentioned frequency, WRT photons, I don't know what that means. Does not an object with axial spin have a built-in frequency, namely its rate of spin? As I understand it, your model requires your gravity particletons to have two polarities, positive, negative, and produce different perpendicular outcomes when they collide with either matter, electrons, i.e. electrons, or protons, or neutrons, which are just protons and electrons. But anyway, yes, when they interact with constituent matter of the same or opposite polarity, or geometric orientation, it could be. As I understand it, a spinning pool ball has more momentum than a non-spinning pool ball has a rotational frequency. Yeah, okay, well, so, well, I'll read the rest of his comment and then answer it. And skids off the collision directly from the non-spinning pool ball. Some of the push force on impact is at right angles to the direction of travel if the spin axis is perpendicular to the direction of travel. Just trying to understand the mechanism behind your polarity property. Well, again, I could argue that it can be a mechanical property that's just as good. I mean, if I take two arrows and have them collide with each other just a little bit off center, the slopes of the arrows will take them in right and left directions. So you can create a mechanical mechanism that will cause something to turn 90 degrees. You don't need spin. And I'm just saying the complication that spin adds is that it would end up adding a second force in the first place. It doesn't explain the frequency of the photon, then you'd still have the length problem. So we know it's a time issue. We know that a certain number of cycles per second. So we know this is about the length of the time. So it's there. so you can't undo that with spin. So a 10-meter wavelength, a 10-meter long photon, which they believe exists. It's 10 meters long as a wave, or it's 100 meters long as a wave. So it's a very slow wave, and so you'd have to incorporate this spin as being one spin per 100 meters or something. And I just don't see. You're adding a second force is my argument, and the fundamental argument is I'm arguing that they're misidentifying the thing that has properties. They think the wrecking ball has the properties, that it can change how fast it smashes into stuff, and it can do all this fancy stuff, momentum things. And I'm arguing, no, it's the tower they're knocking over that has the properties. And if you get it to wobble, you just have to flick it with your finger to add extra energy to knock it over. It doesn't need much once you get it wobbling. And the point is the electrons have the wobble issue. You can get them wobbling, and then you can knock them out of their space with a second impact before they settle, before they become rigid again. So the idea of quantization kind of eliminates this idea of spin, because then you'd have another factor that you'd have to Planck constant for or something. And would the spin always be 100%? Like, would you always transfer your spin 100% to whatever you hit? It would have to be 100%, or we'd have some reason to detect that. And there isn't anything detected. So combine the arguments. First, the kind of silliness of having tons of a different length, which doesn't make much sense. You know, that they're longer, very, very long, and very, very short. When the logical, and somehow the short ones have more power than the big long ones. So something 3 meters long is weak, and yet something tiny, 10 nanometers, X-rays, that's, you know, powerful. Right? Yeah, 10 nanometers. That's hugely more powerful. So it's, you know, logically, you'd say that sounds backwards. Something 10 meters long is a million times maybe, or 1,000 times weaker than something 10 nanometers long. So I'm arguing that the electron is a complex thing, relatively speaking. Not really complex, very simple, but more complex than the photon. The photon is the simplest, elemental, fundamental particle, and the electron is elemental to the atom, it's elemental to matter, but it's not simple as photon. It's in a complex arrangement of force that's holding it in positions, and how you can knock it out of that position, which we are measuring as momentum or energy, is clearly dependent on how fast you shoot the bullets. As I argued, I can knock a building over with a machine gun if I shoot the bullets at just the right speed. If I shoot them at the wrong speed, I get nowhere. If I shoot them at the right speed, I get somewhere. The bullets are exactly the same. All I'm doing is changing the speed at which I shoot them. So same amount of energy, 100 bullets. You just shoot them at the right time, they do something. You shoot them at the wrong timing, they do nothing. So it's not about the momentum of the photons, it's about the condition of the electron with which it's interacting. Longer explanation than I wanted, but it'll have to do. Alright, so a guy called Giraffe Science, who's going to be blocked. What's a beam splitter? Because I spelled it wrong. Who cares? You can't sound it out for yourself? I guess you're really dumb. I said, but yeah. So thank you for wasting my time. Okay. And then Morley needs a hyphen, like I care. Nope, don't care. So anyway, mindless marbles adds to that for some dumb, inexplicable reason. You know, considering that I've already showed you the single and double slit equations, no you haven't, which are shown to be derived using the same method, no you haven't, and which you even did a video exemplifying how much you don't understand them, well, frankly, post the link again, I'll do another video. Because you didn't produce an equation that produces the double slit pattern, the two patterns in one, and you didn't do it with math that's consistent, because clearly the two circumstances are different. One has a single impediment in the math, and you rationally can't really do the math exactly the same. And clearly, as I've pointed out, this argument is about what the physicists at MIT, Stanford, and Yale, they're the ones I showed talking about this, and you're saying they don't know what they're talking about. You say you know this the right way to do it. Well, why aren't they doing it the right way? I mean, fuck. You're not responding to the point being made that all over the internet, if I look for the math, I'll find math where in one equation they use a term to describe the width of the slit, and in the other equation they'll use the same term, and now they're talking about the width of the impediment, and they don't even care how wide the slits are. How could the math possibly be accurate if it doesn't even include the width of the slits? Please, it's just silly. What is anyone supposed to think when you rehash the idea that physics has the physics is changed when they switch the double slit? And I'll say it again. That's the way they're teaching it. He said it. When it's a double slit experiment, he said it. Oh, we consider them single point sources. Because if we didn't, we'd end up with 4 waves instead of 2. So we don't have any choice. Clearly. Alright, if you're not a liar, then what else? How am I lying, asshole? Daft, dumb, or deaf? Well, keep up those comments and you'll be blocked. So get what you deserve. You just keep doing this shit, right? My videos don't have that crap in them. And yet you can spew that crap and I'm supposed to just say it's okay. Fuck you. It's not okay. If anything, you should just cite the video. If you're going to say I already did a video on the subject, then why don't you post the link to that video and explain what's wrong with what I said in that video, which is probably the same thing, that your math doesn't work. And clearly the math being taught at university is what we're talking about, and we're talking about what the math will look like if I go to Khan Academy, if I go to any resource on the internet on the double and single slit experiment. I'll see them switch those important variables, and I'll see them contrive a way to use Huygens in 2 different ways. Not the same way, in 2 different ways. Okay, so Benson Bear Guy says, explain to me how that's not the implications of the principle. And he says, Huygens' principle does not say 2 waves in 1 slit on the edges of the slit. Well, I don't care, it says 2 waves in the single slit experiment. That's what it says. It creates 2 waves. That's its entire function, is to turn 1 wave into 2 waves. It says, in any slit of any non-zero width, an infinite number of waves, 1 at each point. Again, you can keep saying that, and I'll play the fucking Yale physics teacher say, yeah, it doesn't matter. They all cancel out and there's 2 left. That's what happens. The math works because they create 2 waves. Shit, they turn the single slit into a double slit with a contrivance at each point. The principle is not abandoned at all in the 2 slit case. Well, it is fundamentally abandoned when they don't even pay attention to how wide the slits are. That's pretty much an abandonment in my opinion. When you ignore how wide the slits are and change the variable to the width of the impediment in between the 2 slits, I'd say that's as abandoned as you can get. When a single slit is very narrow, we're not talking about anything very narrow, we're talking about a standard slit, okay? So take the same exact slit used in the single slit and use it in the double slit. Or have the combined width of the two slits equal the same width as in the single slit. Do the experiment the right way. At a tenth of a millimeter or so width slit should produce a pretty wide, a pretty active pattern in the single slit experiment, and so just use that width. Why are you changing the width of the slits? Oh, that's more contrivances. Alright, when a single slit is very narrow to the wavelength, well, again, it's irrelevant to the wavelength. It's narrow to anything, absolutely narrow. Okay, you don't have to say to the wavelength. All the wavelengths of light are pretty much the same by comparison to the width of the slit. A tenth of a millimeter is always going to be a hell of a lot of nanometers. Fuck. Huygens' principle will imply that there is a very large central bump in the pattern at the screen. Well, again, you can keep saying it'll imply something. I'm saying that's not the single slit experiment. So if you do a single slit with a wider aperture, you'll get plenty of bars. 50 of them. Single slit can produce 50 humps. Use that width. So use the width that produces 50 humps. What's so complicated? Then, if there is another very narrow slit exists nearby to the right, this second slit on its own, with an infinite number of waves coming out of it, would produce another large hump on the screen. Yeah, so again, says you. There's no, these rules are silly. And again, your math is already, the math taught is already fundamentally broken because you've eliminated the width of the slits as being a variable, which seems on its face insane. You know, to sit there and say this is the most accurate, most predictive math in the universe, and yet you think that if I don't change the width of the slits on the double slit experiment, I'm going to fundamentally change the pattern on the fucking wall. You think that's true? Well, it's not. You're silly. However, the two infinite sets of waves will interfere not just with the waves in their own set, but also the waves in the other set. Says you. The result then is the classic two-slit interference pattern. Well, again, says you. At first, that's not what the math does, because then it would be an infinite number of diffracted on-off patterns, and so there would be lots and lots and lots of bars. If one looks just at the central part, there will be a large number of bands, depending on the width and the wavelength. The width of what? Depending on the slit width and the light wavelength. Well, again, at MIT, Yale, and Stanford, they don't worry about the width of the slits in the double slit experiment. They just worry about the width of the single impediment. If one looks out a bit further, one can see these bands are contained in the characteristic one-slit envelope. And again, if the single slit width, if you use the width of the slit in the single slit, where the single slit produces 50 bars, then you have a whole different ball game, don't you? Yeah, I'd say you do. So this envelope is dependent on what? And frankly, the experiments I've done so far, I haven't yet found the envelope, so to speak. I'm not getting the traditional two-slit envelope. There is absolutely no abandonment whatsoever of Huygens' principle in the two-slit case. So again, you're just not getting the point. I'm sorry, I mean, I don't know how else to explain it. You say none whatsoever when it's a fact that they call it a single point source and pretend the slits don't exist as slits, creating with waves going into them like Huygens would say, and with two waves coming out like they do in the single slit. So again, Huygens in the single slit creates two waves that interfere with themselves. The rest cancel out. How come in the two slits in the double slit experiment there's only one wave coming out of the single slit? Why aren't there two? Huygens says there should be two. There should be 4 waves interfering. So to say there's absolutely none whatsoever, I've played the professor's clips. I mean, I don't know what else I can do. I've shown the math being done that way. I've shown the professor saying it. And you're just going to deny that exists. Okay, fine. There's nothing I can do. In fact, I have written a little program which computes two-slit interference directly using Huygens' principle. Huygens isn't in the math, so I don't know exactly how you can do that. It's really not in the math. You know, it's not there. It's a presumption getting to the math. Yeah, I mean the standard wave equation. You can't do the standard wave equation math until you first create the artificial Huygens product. Anyway, interference directly using Huygens principle, but approximating the infinite number of waves with only a finite number. Of what? Your discretion? So you did an integral over what? Why don't you just show the math you did? I mean, why fuck around with a silly program? It has some built-in examples. Well, you know, I'm not too interested in contrived examples, which demonstrate what good results such an approximation can contain. And it also has a crude interface where one can try out many different values, including by stepping through sets of values where one or more parameters are incremented in step with one another. I'll go look at it, but I'm really not interested in a program. I'm interested in what you programmed it to do and why it does what it does. So what magic math are you using that they're not teaching at MIT and not teaching at Stanford and not teaching at Yale? Alright, and Mindless says, just to remove any possible mysticism, when people say infinite number of waves, what they mean to say is that, oh fine, you're going to speak for them now. This is the limiting result as you take more and more wave fronts. The point is this is a discussion about how the physical universe works. And you're established as a principle some notion that this Huygens thing actually happens, when there's absolutely no evidence that it actually happens, that waves do any of this crap, that they show up, that they go through slits as big giant things, that they spread and do all this crap. There, you have no evidence that photons do any of this nonsense. And so what's the point of this? What do we mean by infinite? I mean, it's just bullshit. Anyway, this means the single slit pattern is the limiting result as you consider more and more point sources. So what does that mean? I'm just saying if you use exactly the same slit width in both experiments, then you don't need to worry about any of this limiting nonsense, or we're going to call one a point source, or any of this bullshit. They're both single slits. You just take two single slits and then you put them next to each other. And then explain to me why Huygens behaves differently. Just like the program linked above, this is exactly what would have been predicted by Huygens. Says you. And says not how it's taught, and not how all of the propaganda on this nail-in-the-coffin experiment is presented on the internet. So you say you have this secret truth physics. Well, why aren't they teaching the truth? The reason people say infinite number of waves is because it is much easier to say that. It's what Huygens said, idiot. And it's always understood what it actually means. Yeah, and what it actually means is that in probability analysis you have to include all of the stuff to get the most accurate answer. So because this is really just a probability equation, you're basically just saying if you make all of the individual probabilities, if you include them all as little tiny things, then you reduce the amount of error, something like that. To repeat, Huygens is only a mathematical tool. Well, I'm saying that the idea of physics is to describe the physical universe. If you're going to describe it with a false, contrived mechanism, a mathematical tool, you're not doing physics, in my opinion. You're doing wanky math. It is merely a method to analyze waves. Waves that exist or don't exist. The point is it's describing waves as something that doesn't make any sense. Waves spread. In any medium you have a wave in. Waves don't impact in one single tiny location. They impact across, they spread their force across a whole wide area. There's nothing wave-like about the behavior of photons. It is not a statement about metaphysics. We're not talking about metaphysics, we're talking about actual physics, and you're the one talking metaphysics. You're the one talking an abstraction instead of the actual reality. You're replacing reality with a fake example, a metaphor, an analogy, and it's not right. And I've pointed out why it isn't right as an analogy, because it doesn't even work. So the Benson Bear guy says, just remove any possible mysticism, except this really doesn't remove much mysticism, but it just pushes it under the rug a little further. The idea that there is some meaning to taking any limits implicitly assumes that there is something infinite going on. Well, again, the whole point is that I'm trying to think of a way to say it. I mean, I'm sure Huygens would have liked to say, just divide by 100 little waves, or 1,000 little waves. He would have liked to have done that, but he found that every time he increases the number of little waves, the accuracy gets better, so that he was stuck with this infinite thing. So, as Mindless knows, in the electromagnetic field we are talking about, well, again, this field that doesn't have any factual evidence indicating it exists, there is a metaphysical assumption. Well, again, I don't know why anyone's using the word metaphysics anywhere in this, because why are they doing that? This isn't a conversation about metaphysics. That at each point in the field, at each time, there is a value, and that these values have a certain relation to one another that can be expressed with a differential equation. Which is, there's nothing wrong with doing that also, but again, that's just sort of obvious that if you put an atom in some space, there's a whole bunch of assumptions built in about the functions of all the bits inside of the atom. So it's like having a bunch of dominoes that are actually standing up and can knock each other over. So yes, those locations in space are now occupied by dominoes that can be tipped, kind of a thing. But it's still pointless to abstract when you can actually talk about the physical reality instead of an abstraction. Arguably, the metaphysics is merely within the mechanical model, but in that model, then, is just as heavy a metaphysics as the idea that there are an infinite number of waves, which is just so stupid. If one wants to claim this metaphysics is not also in reality, which is modeled, then one presumably has the still very difficult, if not even more difficult, problem of showing how a different metaphysics can be modeled effectively by using one containing infinities. Well, regardless of what it is, I'm just saying just physics itself isn't, in my opinion, there's no compatibility in physics with the idea of infinities in confined spaces. Let's see. I should also add, by the way, oh dear, that my program does not literally use Huygens principle. At least as I understand it, but only does something sort of similar. Well, again, what does this have to do, again, with my argument that if it's supposed to be nail-in-the-coffin evidence, shouldn't be this convoluted. Nail-in-the-coffin evidence shouldn't be taught differently in all these different locations and done differently in all these different locations. It assumes that the values of the field is held constant at the slit to be the same sine wave at each point in the opening of the slit. Of course, for any non-zero slit width, that is an infinite number of points. So, again, regardless, I'm sorry, but all that ends up doing is, again, creating two waves in the single slit experiment. How come it doesn't create two waves in the double slit, in each slit? If assumed this is the only externally provided source of light, and then just assumes that the intensity of the light at each other point is the sum of the contributions of each of these points. So in effect, it only applies Huygens principle at that one point. And I think this would quite easily derive to mathematical correctness of. So whatever. So it doesn't seem like it's a counter argument to my point. What is more difficult is to prove that an approximation derived by using only a few points, as in the program does, will be accurate. Yeah, well, that's the problem. None of this stuff is ever done with experiments side by side and actually shown how the math actually does accurately predict in various circumstances. So do the math on a very thin slit and then widen the slit and do the same math and see if your answers are the same. See if the results actually are the same. My point is, doing it this way was to be as empirical as possible and not use any difficult mathematics to derive solutions or approximate solutions to the differential equation boundary value problem. Rather, it seems very natural to just add up the contributions made at each point of the slit to the result as seen on the screen and empirically confirm that the sum tends to match the observed results more and more closely as the number of points included in the approximation rises. Well, I don't know how you're adding what percentage get diffracted, so you still have the probability math to do. So how are you establishing those probabilities at each point? Oh, mindless creep. Thank you for the interesting reply. I thought I would get straight to the point and only then reply to some of the quotes. It wouldn't be in misleading conversations. Basically, it seems like you're making an attack against the idea of continuum. I'll just lay some random thoughts out there. I don't know how much of this I want to bother with. Let's see, who are we to impose this set of theoretic structures on reality and declare that it is built out of infinitely many points? Granted, I don't have any alternative formulations, but it seems as though this way of thinking an accidental result of people trying to ground everything in math in set theory. Well, whatever. I mean, what you're trying to do, I think, is, make rationalizations and just totally evade the argument being made, which is clearly there is no consistency in how Huygens is taught in all the major universities between the single slit and the double slit. It's applied fundamentally differently. I was not making an attack against the continuum, but rather asserting that its existence is just metaphysical, I don't want to mystical, as to whether mysticism is encoded into Huygens' principle. I'm not saying one should throw out the continuum either. Well, whatever. I won't bother with this. They're getting way more abstract than this conversation necessitates. Alright. A phenomenon for YouTube alike, answering to Trollian grievances at some recording at least. I don't know what that means. Jordan Peterson, so another guy who needs to be blocked because you can't post comments using a regular human's name. Got to steal somebody else's. Let's see. You say that assumptions made by the Huygens-Fresnel principle are insane. Yeah, I think they're ludicrous. Fortunately, you don't have to make them to derive the correct diffraction math. Kirchhoff's diffraction formula applies to wave equations and aperture and gives the same results without assumptions of secondary point sources, etc. Then why aren't they teaching that in Stanford, Yale, and MIT? Alright, let's see. It's a pure stupid comment. I think I've responded to this before. I'm talking about the fact that there is zero evidence of tons, and it's Superior Mind points out zero evidence of photons. Yes, and they use the word graviton and magneton, but all of those don't exist somehow. Amazing. Puro's useless drivel. Stupid cunt. Anyway, so another guy I'll block, Mr. Knight Shamalama Ding Dong. This is too stupid a name to post on any of my videos. Oh sure, we don't know space is bent, and when we point telescopes at large masses it seems to bend light. Well, here we are back to this seems word again. I've only pointed out that there's no gravity in the world, as we understand gravity, that can do that at 500 light years across. You can't make a lens that big with a non-solid gravity density. A bunch of scattered bits of matter can't create enough gravity to create a lens that big. It's against the law of gravity, asshole. That's why they had to invent dark matter, retard. So space looks bent, sure. Says you, it doesn't look bent at all to me. But how do we really know? Let's see. After all, just seeing bent space and such weak evidence. So again, you see it. I don't see it. You see these little smears on a 13 billion light year time exposure image, and you assume that it's some galaxy being lensed over a 2 or 3 light year sized lens where there's no source of gravity strong enough to bend the light, where Einstein would say that can't happen, but you say it seems to you. Alright, arrogant shit, superior mind, arrogant shithead, space is nothing. How do you bend nothing, retard? Obviously there's something, whether medium or the elements of force, something real would need to be refracted, diffracted, not bent. Well, the simple truth is light travels in a straight line from point A to point B, unless it hits an electron. Period. And that goes for how it's emitted, and that's how it's received. So when light's ejected, it's ejected in a straight line. So when I look in the sky at Venus, I'm seeing light that left Venus and was heading for this location in space, and that's the photon that arrives here. It left heading right for this location in space, and it arrived at this location in space, and then the Earth happened to just get to this location in space at the right time, and then I see that photon. But that photon didn't do anything else. It didn't go sideways or do any of this other bullshit. It went the speed of light in a straight line to that point, and it didn't take any curved lines. Alright, I think if you had, so here's Shama Ding Dong. I think if you had a real argument, you would have to resort to make calling. It's not even close to name. I mean, really, make and name, not even close. I really can't expect better from the side that denies we even see space bend. Well, again, you say you see space bend, and you don't understand that you don't see it, right? There's no pictures of it, of the sun bending anything. We don't have any verification from the Hubble telescope. We don't have a picture of a black hole with a bunch of the stars in the background swirling around. We have simulations. We don't have any pictures of any of this stuff. So when you say we see it, we don't really see it. That's kind of a lie. And like I said, a time exposure image that has some smearing on it, that doesn't cut it. Alright, well anyway, so I'm not even going to bother reading the rest of this comment because he's an idiot. Resort to name calling, irrelevant, although I suppose it could be nicer, but I'm tired of the arrogance. Well, yes, arrogance deserves to be called what it is, asshole. I really can't expect better from the side. Versus us versus them mentality, also irrelevant. Denies space is bent. Here we go. You don't see space bend, idiot. You see light reflected or deflected. Diffracted. Nothing doesn't bend. Yes, this is so damn true. And if you're going to claim that space is a medium, then don't call it space. Call it medium. Call it bent medium. And that it's your understanding that photons, although they're electromagnetic, can't be moved by electricity or magnetism, but somehow gravity moves them. So the fields, so we have the bent space field, so we'll call it bendia. And then we have the magnetic field, magnia, and the electrical field, electria. So photons can't be moved in electria, they can't be moved in magnia, even though they're electromagnetic, but they can be moved in gravitia. Is that it? I think it's stupid. So anyway, nothing doesn't bend. Think about it for a second. It has to be a something, otherwise it's nonsense. The manifestation of materials can be warped, but that's not space. It's materials, because space is not nothing unless you're referring to some sort of medium. So anyway, yeah, so I won't go through all this. But alright, then Mindless had to add his 2 cents, which is usually stupid. Your characterization of nothing isn't really fair for a number of reasons. Why isn't it fair? Space was in... The word space was intended to describe nothing, not something. If there was nothing between the Earth and the Moon, they would be touching each other. No. So again, he's just going to pervert the word nothing. So now nothing can't possibly take up space. It can't have volume between somethings. Somethings have to be hitting each other, or there can't be nothing between them. So 2 runners can't run in opposite directions without creating some kind of real nothing between them. And there's no such rule. Already we have difficulties with language. Well, again, I think it's your perversion of language. You're creating a medium, and you're saying the medium must always exist and nothing unmedium can exist. So you're saying there's no such thing as an unmedium space. No space can't be a medium. Everything must be a medium. Alright, what's the absence of color? What do you think that's going to mean something? The absence of color? There can't be an absence of color if it's a photon, idiot. Almost everyone would say black, but then what do people who were born blind see? What does that have to do with it? It's about photons, idiot. What they make up in their brain has nothing to do with whether photons fly through the space. Consider this exercise. Now just go fuck yourself. Close your eyes and try to focus on your tactile senses. Oh, this is metaphysics now. This is some sort of wanky fucking psychology bullshit. It's a physics discussion, idiot. Alright, my point is, you can have something that you think is nothing. This isn't about what somebody thinks. It's about using rational words. When we define the word space, it was intended to mean the stuff between somethings, not something itself. But when you examine closer, you see that it's not really nothing. Well, again, you're the one claiming it's not nothing, so why don't you call it something? Why do you keep pretending? Why do you keep faking and hiding between this space word? Why don't you say the bent medium? Why don't you say the ether? Bent ether. Obviously, nothing in the, let's see, philosophical absolute sense wouldn't have any properties, but no one has ever claimed space as nothing. Well, I guess I'm saying when the word was invented, that's what it was invented to describe, was nothing in the philosophical sense, only in the idiomatic sense. Well, again, you're the idiot who's changing the meaning of words. Going back to the first thing I raised, if there is absolutely nothing between my face and the screen, then there would be no space. So again, he's saying there can't be nothing. He's going to force everything to be ether, or there's no such thing as unether or absence of ether. It all must be filled with ether. This is a problem in pre-relativistic mechanics as well as in GR. Well, again, this is your bullshit. So again, you just change the meaning of words and play a game to pretend you can do this nonsense, as they did to create the fake gravitational wave nonsense of converting matter into the bent nothing. So the argument that nothing doesn't bend or nothing is doing the something do not work. Well, again, it's your perversion of language. So again, just pretend you're saying the word ether without saying it. You're too cowardly to say you believe the universe is full of ether. Bent ether. I'm not saying you can't make arguments against GR, but I hope I demonstrate that saying bent nothing and bent nothing and bent nothing is silly and unfair characterization. No, it's yours. It's a silly and unfair evasion of the real implications of your damn fucking theory. You think there's an ether that's bent and photons have to obey it. Despite all of that, what I wrote, I actually agree that we should strive to find a deeper underlying theory. I am actually on board with that, but deeper in what sense? Oh, you mean accurate? A deeper underlying theory. Well, what does that mean? You're already neck deep in bullshit. Neck deep in made up fake fields, forces, and ethers. You're not blaming a single fucking phenomenon in the physical universe on something that actually exists. You keep blaming it on things that don't exist. You can't, and again, you can't even figure out that the electrons are the complex thing and the photons are the simple thing. Fucking idiot. Alright, I'm actually on board with that, but the argument that you can't bend nothing is very misleading. No, the fucking idea that you're going to sit there and call space a something that you can bend is the misleading perversion. It's nothing, but it bends. It's special nothing that has properties. Fuck. You can say that it is always a good idea to try to find a framework from which you can derive other frameworks, and with that I agree. Well, I don't even... That just sounds like gobbledygook. What a fucking evasion. Alright, then some idiot posts this Earnshaw theorem. Oh, I'm sure this is going to be another spectacular pile of shit. Oscillations that just go inward and outward wouldn't work since all the forces are proportional to distance. So this is a reply to his own comment, and I don't even know what this is. Oscillations that go inward and outward. Who was talking about inward and outward oscillations? So if the electrons go inward to the proton just a little, they will go all the way in actually because the ratio force doesn't change. Well, says you. So you just have these assumptions. I mean, as I previously explained in the relationship between the proton and the electron, the trick is that it's the strongest force because everything leaks out. But the fact is that the field energy is still coming in from all directions. So some of the energy actually comes in perpendicular to the proton and leaves going this way, and it will hit the electron. And the same thing's happening to the electron. There is still field energy coming in from the perpendicular. They'll end up coming straight down and hit the proton. So in theory, the two of them never will be able to collide. They will be able to get a certain distance from each other and no closer, because the field energy will still be producing a little bit of perpendicular. So there'll be a little bit of pressure on that inside, and it'll matter when they're that close. And so they can't collide theoretically. But as they get further and further away from each other, the lack of pressure becomes huge, because that little tiny bit has a very low frequency. It's so little. It's such a small amount of time. See, the difference between a 1 ton bouncing at a very short distance and 1 ton on a long distance, the number of interactions is the key to it. And so it's only when you get them very close do you get a lot of interactions just from the field. So they don't collide, shithead. Also, hydrogen has only a single electron. Nothing there to counter the inward force. As I just pointed out, the inward force will be countered when they get really close to each other, and you're not accounting for the fact that there are neutrons, which have some repulsive electron energy. This nigga dumb as fuck. Oh, that asshole going to be blocked as fuck. Yeah, we'll just get rid of that. Get rid of a lot of shit here soon. Let's see, geez, 27 thumbs down, what the fuck? Yeah, well, it's just the trolls have been busy lately on both my channels. No news flash there. Oh, they can't play a fair game, so what else is new? The way you can learn, okay, so a person thumbed down because they were an idiot, or maybe they have some issue with volume, or maybe there's some issue with a particular thing you said, troll, whatever. Yes, YouTube should have a policy where they don't get away with just unaccountable nonsense. So this William Horace guy is just so obnoxiously aggressive in his tone, and I don't really understand. Okay, so he's a fringe Tesla guy. His channel, if you go there, it's just, I mean, it's kind of this pointless, like they think they're going to make more energy by perfecting the electrical motor, and it's not like it's, you know, 1910 anymore. Okay, there's not a lot of improvements you can make that we haven't already figured out in terms of efficiencies. And yes, if you spend $10,000, you might be able to get another 3 or 4% efficiency out of a motor. But that's all you're going to get. It's a little tiny reward. So you're going to spend a preposterous amount of money to get a little tiny profit in efficiency. But you're not going to create energy, idiots. Tesla was a retard in many respects, and this devotion is just totally out of perspective. Alright, so he says, shut up, you fucking troll. You can't, you ain't got a damn clue. You an ass clown that spews lies. Your karma will get you. Beware. Well, no, I hope you get exactly what you deserve. So if you think you're playing an honorable game, you haven't lied to the people watching your videos. You're the guy who's got the karma problem, asshole. I mean, you already know you've played with this shit and realized, oh yeah, well, I got electrocuted a few times, but I'm not getting anywhere. You know you haven't made fucking energy 1. You haven't made 10 calories worth of energy, idiot. Let's see, you don't know when to shut up. How does your foot taste in your mouth? Again, you're living in a pretty glass house to be saying this to other people. Outsider guy. You don't think anybody could type the same shit on your videos, retard? Man, I'm just gonna delete. I won't block. I'll just leave one comment by the turd. This ass clown is a goddamn fool, damned by me. I wouldn't believe a word he says. It's all garbage based on garbage. When you put garbage in, you get garbage out. Yeah, well again, that's what Tesla will do for you, fella. There's nothing theoretically correct in Tesla's energy dynamics. He didn't even understand how the atmosphere worked. That's why his idiotic notion that he was going to transmit electricity through the atmosphere was just so obviously ill-advised. That just somehow you're going to shoot it through that dense medium, and you're not going to heat it up or evaporate it or affect all those electrons. That was just kind of idiotic. I mean, a grammar school kid could have told him, that ain't going to work, buddy. Alright, let's see. So this guy's ragging on that LIGO, so I'm not even going to bother. These are just cliche kind of rags. Oh, the sound, rabbits hopping on top of that thing could set it off. These are all your accusations. You're not going to back them up with anything, so what good are they? It doesn't work isn't a good enough argument. You have to say a little bit more than that. Alright, anyway. So again, no arguments on the subject of the video. The primary subject. The subject I pointed out in the beginning of the video. This is what the video is about. And not a single mention of the observation that beam splitters do not create two equal beams of light. Alright. So, till next time and such.